Samantha, how you
Hello,
doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Thank you very much for jumping on an important discussion, which I think a lot of people were going to benefit from this.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
you've had a tough road over the last few months. Oh, sorry,
Yeah.
years, I should say. And many people, I guess, know who you are and some of the work that you're doing behind the scenes. But just tell everyone what's been happening with you just over the last few years.
Yeah, so in August 2021, I lost my brother to suicide. So it has been a very, very difficult journey coming back from that. Um, he suffered long term with mental health. He started self harming at age 16, I think. That was his first attempt at something. And it's just been obviously progressively getting worse over that time, and then leading up to his suicide as well. So, yeah, it
Yeah.
has been very, very difficult.
100%. And what's really alarming, Sam, is it was just so sudden. You know,
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, there were warning signs,
yeah,
and you knew what was going on, but you didn't think it
yeah.
would sort of unfold into what happened. And what were some of the
No.
warning signs? Like, what were some of the alarm bells that you remember?
Um, So, there were some warning signs, looking back now. So the night of his suicide, he called my mum in like a burst of excitement, called her and was so excited about his life. And whereas the days and months prior, he was quite down and, you could tell that he was suffering. But this night in particular, he had a burst of excitement. He called my mum saying how excited he was about life, how, everything's going great with his barber apprenticeship, that he's getting his life on track again. And then 2 hours later, he took his life. And looking back now, that's a warning sign of this burst of excitement and
Yeah.
inspiration when normally he wasn't necessarily like that.
Yeah. And leading up to it too, Sam, I mean, the months leading up to it, were there other warning signs? Like, was he becoming very self-isolated, and did he want to be
Yeah.
alone majority of the time?
Yeah.
Was he showing lack of interest in certain activities? Because he was a dancer, wasn't he?
Yeah, that's right.
He,
Yeah, he was a
he
professional dancer.
yeah. Were there other warning signs like that?
Yeah, he was isolating himself. He was asking me, specifically, more and more for me to spend time with him. I'm assuming because he felt so alone, and obviously, another warning sign was his self harming was becoming more severe.
Yeah.
So, you know, um, he would regularly cut, and they would be quite significant. But
Yeah.
about a month before his suicide, he actually um, severed the tendons in his arms to the point where he completely couldn't use them. So he had to have
Yeah.
emergency surgery. And yeah, it was just walking into that house after he would self-harm. It would often
Yeah.
look like a murder scene because there was
Yeah.
just blood everywhere. And I'm not talking about just little spatters of blood. It was clogging blood. That's how severe his self-harming was.
And like, did he show any other signs? Was there sort of any indication that he might have, you know, given you any warning signs about, the idea of suicide? Were there any other signs like that? Did he often, talk down about himself? People would just be
Yeah,
better off without me being here. And
yeah, yeah. He would. There was warning signs in that aspect. He did attempt one time and left a suicide note, and again, that's another warning sign. And each of these times, he would go to the hospital because he would be taken under an EEA from the police, and they would take him and assess him, and within 6 hours the hospital would just release him back into the public.
Yeah, we really are failing men, Sam. And
we are.
I heard this from Chris Williamson. He spoke to a psychiatrist. He had him on his podcast, and he said that male depression gets treated like female depression. And men really are different in the way that we handle struggle and adversity in comparison to women. Women do have this support system, but there unfortunately still is this stigma that is, in society now, that men can't speak up. It's weak to speak up. And men unfortunately carry a huge amount of weight on their shoulders. Well, what do you think is the problem with our mental health services right now? What is going on with that?
Especially for men, I feel like you said, men are programmed to be somewhat unemotional, and that's normal. But in real world, it doesn't work like that. Men need to talk. Men need to have brothers around them. So I think that's definitely where we're going wrong, is we don't really have enough brotherhood support for our men, because you can drill it into them all you like, is you got to speak out, you've got to talk about things, but it's not the only thing that's going to help for them. Men need purpose. Men need to be doing something. They don't want to be sitting in a chair and just talking about their problems. So I definitely think that we're going wrong in that sense of we just don't have enough support services specifically targeted for men.
And by the looks of Jamie, I never met him, but he seemed just like such a caring, kind, benevolent person. It would have been amazing to meet him, but he was a fit guy. He worked out. He looked pretty fit. It seemed like he was heavily into exercise and things like that. But just unfortunately, it was just what was going on inside him. He was battling. What were some of the things that the therapist would do to help him through it? Like, would he sort of go in depth with some of his sessions with how it went?
No, not necessarily. He was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder not long before he died, and it's based around talk therapy. That's the only cure, not cure, but therapy for that specific targeted mental illness, whereas schizophrenia or bipolar, you can take medication. There's no actual targeted medication for BPD. So the way that he was told to get help was to do the talk therapy, and this specific talk therapy, there was a wait list, so it would be a 12-month wait list, and that was just too long for him, so he didn't engage in any of that. He did have a GP that he would regularly see. He had seen a couple of counsellors, but nothing ever long-term and consistent. So Jamie obviously was a professional dancer, and so he would be away for 9 months at a time on contract, traveling the world dancing. And so it wasn't feasible for him to have a regular counsellor, so he would just deal with it himself, and he was abusing alcohol, and that was his way of coping, unfortunately.
What I've noticed too, Sam, about health services is they're obviously incredibly busy with other people, and what's really interesting and quite hard to grapple with is it's very hard to notice what the high-risk clients or patients are, because there's a lot of people that are suffering through mental health, and we live in a society where we're constantly influxed with work-related issues, and we're very busy, and some people just may not have the time to go and seek help, because obviously bills have to be paid.
That's right.
Yeah, what was Jamie sort of in a situation where he just didn't have the time to go seek help? He was just so bombarded with.
That's right. He didn't have the time and he didn't have the money. And so at that time when he was really going downhill, it was we were in a COVID lockdown. Yeah. And so he was isolated from everyone. He had COVID. He attempted in one of those times to take to hospital. And then, you know, the hospital's, I guess, referral process is, you know, you go to a hospital because you're in an emergency need, right? But then they will refer you on to someone else. That generally takes a little while to get into anywhere, and it costs money. And because Jamie was home and not working, and not having any income come in, and he just couldn't afford to go and have therapy sessions every week. And, you know, he probably needed more than one a week. He probably at the time needed a couple, and it just was not feasible for him financially.
Yeah, 100%. And from what you noticed on the help that he was getting, what sort of strikes, you know, what sort of strikes you, I guess, in just the way they handled the situation? Could they have done better? Could they have done more? Yeah,
absolutely. So Jamie did seek help for his alcohol substance abuse, and you know, he had to go a period of time. They put him on medication to stop him from having those cravings of drinking, and you know, they said. I think he went to his last check-in session, which was on the 6th day, and he had to last about 7 days. Anyway, he told me one of the counsellors there said to him, "Oh, you've gone fine 6 days without alcohol. You're not an alcoholic." And then that was almost like Jamie's green light in his brain to say, "Oh, they don't think I'm an alcoholic, so maybe I'm not an alcoholic and I don't have a problem." That night he drank and he self-harmed.
Yeah. And did he always have that idea that he wasn't worth enough because he was gay? You know, did he always wish that he just felt that he was a heterosexual male because you know, was he getting criticized for being gay, or did he
absolutely.
have, you know, people can be so cruel and heartless, you know, were there people that just around him just affected just who he was as a person?
Yeah, absolutely. So growing up, Jamie hid the fact that he was gay for quite some time. He had a female fiance at one point, and I think he was hiding his actual real identity and who he was. Eventually, he came out that he was bisexual, and then that obviously turned to that he was gay. But growing up, he had an awful experience of childhood in the sense of he was bullied. You know, no one liked him because he was gay. So he had to really suppress that for such a really, really long time. Yeah. In his adulthood, you know, I've spoken about this with him before, where he worked at Fluffy for a little while and he was on his way home, and obviously he had his like costume or something on that was a bit flamboyant. Someone drove past him and stopped their car and just bashed him just because of that, and then just took off. Yeah, so he suffered so much, that kid, in the sense of, you know, not feeling worthwhile, thinking that he's the scum of the earth because he's gay, when in reality it should not matter at all. Love is love.
No. Exactly. You know, I think that people aren't born into a society either racist or homophobic. And there was a video I watched ages ago of two toddlers of different ethnic backgrounds. One was a white toddler and one was an African-American toddler. And they both ran up towards each other and hugged each other. Yeah. And it's interesting because I think we really do, need to educate children, especially on the ramifications and the importance of being kind and showing empathy, because it just has a huge deleterious effect. Yeah. And you just never know on what someone's going through. And what do you think also is some of the common misconceptions or stereotypes with regards to mental health, more so being masculinity?
Yeah, I think some of the misconceptions is that men need to be strong at all times, and they cannot at any instance show any kind of vulnerability, because if you show vulnerability, it equals that you are weak, and no one's going to take you seriously if you show any vulnerability, which is just wild. So I really feel like that men just really need to kind of, I guess, find a way on how they can express their vulnerability in safe spaces, rather than just to any Tom, Dick and Harry. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting you're touching on vulnerability, and, you know, you and I have spoken about this as well.
Yeah.
But you said in a recent post, you said that you are ashamed to be part of the female race of men trying to speak up and express their vulnerability in front of their girlfriend or wife, for it to only be shoved back in their face. And you think that, and I think this is a growing concern as well, that there are a lot of women that don't know how to handle male vulnerability. Mm-hmm. And when it comes to time and pressure and stress of life, you know, who do they want to turn to most is their romantic partner, not just their family, to support them. Yeah. And men are in this situation where there's still that stigma around being stoic and not showing any emotion and being that strong leader and role model. And yet, in fact, you made a good observation that men aren't robots, and it's perfectly acceptable for a man to show vulnerability, even to the point of crying in front of their partner. But there's a lot of forums I've read online where men have spoken up about their vulnerability only to be shoved back in their face and weaponized and used against them in a future argument. What do you think women don't? What do you think is the problem on why women don't accept or handle male vulnerability?
Yeah, I don't know what their problem is. I think for me, I feel like these women just haven't done the work within themselves. They need to, if they are throwing it back in a man's face during conflict, you know, reminding them, or even comments like, "Oh, don't be a baby," or "You're a baby if you're crying," or, you know, something like that. And it makes you uncomfortable if your man is vulnerable, or you see him cry. You need to, as a woman, you need to ask yourself those questions of why. Why does this make me uncomfortable? Why do I feel like, you know, a man has to be strong at all times? If a man was to come to me and, you know, is vulnerable, I respect him tenfold.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know what too, Sam, I think one of the greatest compliments a man can give a woman is being vulnerable and showing vulnerability, because he's completely hard at all times, and yet you get to see that softer, sensitive side of him. It's one of the greatest compliments a woman can receive. Now, we're not talking about a man being a crybaby every day because he got his PlayStation turned off, or you know, something stupid like that. Something minuscule. But if we're talking about something serious, whether it be a death in the family, or he's really struggling in the workplace with his problems, but it's almost to the point where it's impacting his mental health, I think there is a huge conversation that needs to be had in how women handle male vulnerability. And not just women too. I think guys also need to have that brotherhood. They need that brotherhood and that safe space. What's really alarming with all this too, Sam, is we have an epidemic of loneliness and sexlessness amongst the sexes in our 4 million year history. We have such a huge rise in loneliness, which is kind of ironic. We live in this Facebook, TikTok, social media world. And so many people are lonely. During the COVID lockdown, what was that like, especially for your family and with what Jamie and everything that happened?
It was really difficult because we all just wanted to be around Jamie as much as we could, and we were told we couldn't. I mean, I broke the rules and I saw him, I wasn't going to let that stand in the way at all when I knew that he was struggling. But I do think he was feeling very, very lonely. He was told he can't go out. He wasn't working, all those things. So it was a very, very difficult time.
Yeah, and he seemed like a very people person, Sam. Like he seemed like the very flamboyant, outgoing,
social, loved
social.
it.
Yeah, and it really was such a difficult time for a lot of people, but more so for mental health. Mental health just skyrocketed tenfold. The idea of just being locked away in your house and being isolated from family and friends, it was just something new. We didn't know what was going to happen. We just were living in unprecedented times, and yet mental health was one of the key factors on just a lot of people's mental well-being. And tragically, all over the world, people are suffering with their mental health. And, I think, do you think a lot of people still struggle with the idea of opening up and, just really just kind of knowing the type of questions to ask? Like, this could have really been avoided if people have asked the right questions. What do you think also is mental health doing wrong?
I think it's also, personally, I think the hospitals are not responding well enough to these crises and these cries for help. I hear so many stories of people, going to the hospital and needing that support and crisis support only just to be let go after a few hours. So I think that comes down to our outdated Mental Health Act, which we really, really, really need to work on because, for example, reading the brief of evidence of all the evidence that has come to light since my brother's suicide, and it's now gone to a coronial inquest. So I've had this brief of evidence and just reading through hundreds and hundreds of pages of hospital documents, it clearly states in there that each time that Jamie presented, so to give you context, each time Jamie was presenting to the hospital, he had self-inflicted severe wounds. So each time, on the paperwork, it says that Jamie did not meet the criteria to be admitted under the Mental Health Act. So that's why each time he was being let go. Now, he presented 11 times before his suicide. 11 times in a short period of time.
That's fucking ridiculous.
And on the 12th time, he took his life. He felt he had no other way. He was not getting any other help. I think it really stems from the point of contact of when you are in a crisis, you go to the hospital, you call the ambulance, the police, and it starts there. So I think that the Mental Health Act needs a big overhaul, and I feel like until that happens, we are going to still continue to see people die. Yeah.
What's really alarming too, Sam, is I think I read the stats in Australia. I think in 2022, over 3,000 Australians took their lives to suicide. And what's really alarming about all this too, we're not just talking about men's mental health, but you're starting to see a rise in female depression and anxiety. I've read the stats. I'm hearing more and more women on antidepressant medication. And I've even heard some women even taking their own lives. And do you think also social media has impacted this as well? Just the way we have evolved in society?
Yeah, definitely. It's well documented that females do suffer from depression a lot more than men, and I think that comes down to hormones, societal pressures and things like that, but it's also known that females seek help for that depression, whereas men just don't.
No.
And that's why that's why we don't see many suicides from women, and it's skyrocketed in men. So obviously it comes back down to the fact that the men of our community are struggling so hard that they don't want to seek help. So where do we fix that? What are we missing in that aspect of females will go and get help for their depression and suicidal ideation and things like that, but why do men just feel like that their only option is to kill themselves?
Yeah, there's still that stigma that men can't talk and openly express their emotions.
Yeah.
And we really do. We have failed as a society, and it's quite alarming now. You're seeing as young as, children, even especially now too, that are suffering.
Yeah.
And what role or impact do you think social media has had, I guess, in just mental health in general? Because we know social media is great. It can be very beneficial business-wise, but we yet understand that there's that deleterious side of social media. And what do you think the role of social media has played in society, especially with our mental health?
I think social media, it has its pros and its cons. It's great for business and things like that. But in regards to mental health, it's so easy for us to compare our lives to the people that we're seeing on social media. Some people are living lavish lifestyles, going on holidays all the time. And if you're not at that stage, of course, it's only natural for you to be like, oh, I wish I was there. But that also creates a really negative mindset of, I should be here at this time. I should be doing what they're doing. So that's why it's really important for you to be, or for people to be, consuming things that are beneficial to them and that make them, think in a positive way. What you consume is not just what you eat; it's what you see, it's what you listen to.
So true.
All of those things.
Yeah, that's so true. Is there a lot of funding now in mental health? Have you noticed? I'm pretty sure I heard that there was a something that was just passed with regards to mental health. There was a bit of funding, but do you know much about that?
No, so I don't really know too much about the funding. I know that it's an ongoing thing, and that they're always trying to push for funding. When Jamie did suicide, I was in contact with the hospital where he was being cared for at the time of his suicide, and since his death, they have really been pushing for this program called Aspires, and it's basically a lot around suicide prevention. So I'm actually due to follow up with them in regards to that and see where that's at the moment. But yeah,
how is that playing out? Are things sort of moving forward?
Slowly but surely they are. So after Jamie suicided, my family and I met with the executive director of the hospital where Jamie was being cared for. I met with a few ministers and safety officers at the hospital, and I basically just grilled them on all the things that they missed, on all the things that they could have done. And since then, they have taken on board some of our family's recommendations and actually have implemented those in the hospital. So, which is amazing, it's great. It's never going to bring my brother back, but it sure will help others from falling through the cracks. So they have a bit more of a in-depth discharge process now. So
and what really makes me angry, Sam, is we were talking yesterday and you used that analogy, or not analogy, but that saying, you can lead a horse to water but you can't make it drink. And the first step, obviously, in a situation where a loved one is going through, whether it be an alcohol problem or a mental health crisis, is they seek help. Jamie was aware of his situation. He wanted to help himself. And yet when he sought help from these essential services, they didn't do their part. And I can't imagine how angry you must have been, because this makes me angry too. We really are failing as a society.
We are. And it's something that I've really, really had a hard time with. For a long time, I blamed the hospital for Jamie's suicide. At that meeting with the executive director, I took in graphic photographs of my brother's self-inflicted wounds, and I showed her. She wouldn't have ever saw them because she wasn't on the floor at those times. You know, she's a pen pusher. She's in the back room writing reports or something. So I thought, no, you need to actually see what we have all seen. And so I showed her these photos, and I showed the other people in the room as well, and they were speechless. And I just said, how can a patient come to the hospital for care because they're in a crisis with severed tendons in their arms, and you send them home straight after emergency surgery the next day?
Yeah, he should have been on like suicide watch or something.
He should have been on suicide watch. He should have been admitted under the Mental Health Act. Not one of those 11 times was he admitted under the Mental Health Act. He was let go each time.
Yeah.
But how? So, of course, dealing with that anger has been a big, big part of my journey, is because, you know, I was blaming them for a long time, you know, and he, you know, he was trying to get the help that, you know, he actually really was trying to get help, but he was met with closed doors eventually at the hospital. And, yeah, it's very frustrating and angry. And sadly, Jamie's story is not the only story.
No. And as you said too, Sam, there are so many families of loved ones that fell through the cracks, and they've tragically are going through the same situation that you and your family are going through. And there's this notion that I think is a huge problem right now, is men are under the assumption that they don't feel needed in the world because of toxic masculinity. And, you know, we need each other. Men and women need each other. And society, I guess, at the moment says being masculine is not good. It's bad. Yeah. And I think even young boys are confused about how they are supposed to be, how they're supposed to be in society, a role of being a man. And I think this also can help with children, especially as more education in school curriculums and things like that. Yeah. What do you think of the current school curriculum and what they should be teaching children?
Yeah, I mean, they should be doing a lot more in regards to mental health and teaching children how to self-regulate. So I'd love to make a program for children primary aged and obviously high school, and those needs of each of those individuals will change from primary school to high school, obviously, as they grow older. But I would love for, you know, Education Queensland to teach children about meditation, teach children about breath work, about self-regulation, about resilience, and all things mental health, and you know, how to take care of themselves, how to eat right, exercise, all of those things. It's so needed because it starts as a child. I mean, I was never taught how to regulate my emotions until I was an adult, and I learned that myself from you know, others. So imagine a world where we, you know, give our children the tools to set themselves up for adulthood. Yeah, imagine how different our world would be.
100%. And I think the school curriculum too, Sammy, is so outdated. Yeah, it really is. And they don't really teach you real life skills in school. They don't teach you entrepreneurial skills, how to start a business, how to manage money, and, you know.
They don't even teach you about your taxes.
Taxes.
Like, it's ridiculous.
Yeah. More importantly, I mean, regulation of mental health, understanding you and how you can sort of regulate your nervous system, as you suggested. And these are important life skills that I think people can really try and make a difference, especially in school curriculums. Because unfortunately, if we look at this epidemic of loneliness and mental health, it's only going to get worse before it gets better. What do you think is some advice that you could give families, especially if they have a loved one that's going through a similar experience? What would be some of the steps that they should do?
In regards to helping them with their mental health?
Yeah, so if they have a son or a daughter or someone close to them that is struggling with their mental health, like what are some of the warning signs that you just said previously that Jamie went through? So I think you said if they become isolated and they just withdraw from hobbies and things like that, what are some of the warning signs?
I would say mood changes, if they generally are pretty happy, but all of a sudden they're just have a really terrible mood. They're a bit more teary than usual. I would go as far as saying things like if they're normally a clean person and you go over their house or something and it's just an absolute pigsty. If they're using words that kind of articulate that they're struggling or not coping or they're finding things too hard, really pay attention to those and the way that they kind of speak, because that will give you some kind of inclination on whether or not they are really struggling.
Yeah. And what about the questions that people need to ask? Because we have this day in Australia called Are You OK Day. It's only one day of the fucking year. What about the 364 other days of the year?
Yeah.
What are some of the questions that families and relatives and friends need to ask if they've noticed a change in someone close to them? Not just the question, are you okay? What would be some of the follow-up questions, and what would be some of the actions that they need to take to help that person?
Yeah, I think obviously, like you said, a good start is to ask them if they're going okay. And it's probably better off not to do that through a text message. It's very easy for the person on the receiving end of that to lie to you, especially if they are depressed or struggling. They're just going to naturally, we go, yeah, we're okay. I'm okay. That's our first instinct when someone goes, oh, how are you? Yeah, I'm okay. So it's much better to gauge with people in that sense, personal, like, in person together. But asking them, how life is, asking them, is there anything that they need help with? Is there any way that you can show up better for them? Asking them just the simple questions, but instead of just continuing to then ask other questions, really stop and listen to what they're saying. Yeah. You will be able to tell whether or not someone is struggling if you stop and actually listen to what they're saying.
Yeah. And I really do think that we go back to that question, male depression gets treated like female depression. And you look at some of these famous people, men especially, that took their own life, Linkin Park's Chester Bennington and Robin Williams and the performer that was part of the Ellen DeGeneres show. He had a wife. Yeah, Twitch. He had a wife. He had kids, multimillionaire, very, very social kind of person. He had a great support system, and yet tragically he took his own life. I think it can also benefit more so from seeking help in the way that we address men and women, because we are biologically different. We really are.
Yeah.
And what sort of work have you done, especially in men's mental health, and what have you found the research say as regards to how men perceive depression and how women perceive depression?
Yeah, so the research that I have done came from the international best practice. So they actually tell us that one of the key ways to improve men's access to support and services is by delivering a more male-friendly service. Yeah. And this fact was actually acknowledged in Australia's first national male health policy, which called on all health professionals, and especially men's mental health professions, to make their practices more male friendly. So rather than blaming men for not accessing it, the approach challenges the stigma stereotype that men don't care about their mental health. So what they're essentially doing is they are now combining getting help with giving help. And I thought that was amazing because, you know, men also want to feel like they're doing something and not
they
just getting
needed.
something. Yeah.
Yeah, they want to feel capable and needed.
Yeah. So they've really, in that research, they combined the getting help and giving help because it makes them feel satisfied. It makes them feel accomplished, which is huge. And so I think that we really need to adapt more of that kind of mentality in regards to men's mental health.
Yeah, it's that famous story that that I go back in and reflect on. Chris Williamson, podcaster, who was talking with, I think, Cameron Haynes, and he was talking about the Blitz that happened in World War II when you had these comatose patients that were unresponsive, and when the bombs started happening and going off, you know, there were no one to drive essential services and ambulances and fire trucks, and these men that were totally comatose and unresponsive for years and years and years got up out of their beds and started driving emergency vehicles to rescue casualties. And it's that saying, give a man a purpose and the ability to achieve it, and he will crawl over broken glass with a smile. And I think the role of a brotherhood and just having men around, whether it be camping in the wilderness or learning a martial art or doing something competitive, or, you know, feeling like you're part of a community is just super important. And not just for men too, I think for women as well. So it's nice to see that there is a bit of a movement with regards to men's mental health. What are you currently working on the moment, Sammy, with regards to what's been happening with you? What are you working on?
Yeah, so obviously I'm trying to push a lot of the recommendations that we made to the hospital. So, you know, just trying to work with them and kind of constantly following up in regards to what they're doing and whether or not it's working, and then changing possibly, you know, things around how they deliver or how they respond more so in crisis. I'm doing, obviously my brother's inquest is coming up in July, so that goes for 2 or 3 days, and I'm not too sure if people know what a coronial inquest is or what the purpose is, but whenever a suicide or a reportable death happens, it's reported to the coroner. Then the coroner generally will start to investigate on who the person was, why they died, how they died, and if there's anything that we could do as a whole, as a collective, to improve and prevent this from happening again. So that's going to be a massive thing, because if the coroner does find that, you know, the hospital didn't do what they could have done and that they could have done more, these recommendations will then be implemented by Queensland Health, so statewide. Yeah.
And what about in the workplace too? You know, you do see a rise in suicide in construction work and things like that. What role does society play in some of these workplace health and safety, and especially with regards to mental health?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of organisations now that are really focusing on construction workers and workers in general, especially I think it's Mates for Mates. They go around and talk. Yeah, they go around and talk, and they've got people on site, and they're really, really, really good to have. Obviously, men do, especially working such long hours and on construction and things like that. They need that support. So there are organisations that are out there specifically for those men.
Yeah. And what do you think parents can do in this particular, on how they can address their child's mental well-being? Because you're a mother, you know what it's like, and you know the trials and tribulations and effort that's required to guide them in the right path. What do you think parents can do to really help their children, especially with mental health?
Yeah, I think just really listening to them and spending quality time with them and building their confidence. This is a massive thing. There's been times where Nash has, started to self-doubt or had a very low self-esteem or self view of himself. And, just reminding your children that they are capable, and whatever they can do, they can put whatever they want to do, they can put their mind to it and actually achieve it. So really just building on that confidence is a huge thing to do.
Yeah. And I guess too, Sammy, it's educating them and talking to them about the questions that you need to ask, that life is sometimes struggle. You're going to fail. Understand that it's part of the human experience.
Yeah.
We really do learn far more of what goes wrong in our lives than what goes right. And these are some of the important things that we can educate our children with.
We have to also, make sure that our children know what to do if they are struggling or, if they are feeling, like they want to kill themselves or die or any of those things of, you really have to take that stuff seriously and remind your children that, there is help out there, and that, talking openly about it is far more better than keeping it bottled up and suppressed.
And I think it starts in the home too. Hey, Sammy, it definitely starts in the home. And what's really interesting is you hear a lot of these people or families that are grieving about their loved one that have just taken their own life, and they have not known or know any known medical condition. They don't have any mental health issues whatsoever. These people are, they're perfectly fine. So that's quite alarming as well too, that they don't have any history of mental health.
It's scary. Yeah, it is very scary because it could just, it could happen to any of us. That's the scary part, right? You could not have any mental health illness or conditions or anything, and then one day you just feel like it's too much. It's a scary thought.
Yeah. And I'm sure, you and your family would have a lot of resentment and guilt and frustration and sadness and sorrow on what you could have done, what you could have done better. What would be some advice to families that are going through a situation and they're asking the questions, what could I have done better? Like, how could I stop this from happening? And you never really truly get over it, do you? You never really get over it. If you've lost someone to suicide, it's always there. That pain is always there. What would be some advice to help families that are going through this similar position that you guys are going through?
Yeah, you're right. We don't ever get over it, and the guilt or the regret can absolutely eat you up. I know I've struggled with that personally myself, because my brother Jamie texted me 2 hours or so before he hung himself, and he asked to hang out with me. And at that point, I was so exhausted because I had been caring for him during the times that he did sever the tendons in his arms and he wasn't able to use them. So I would go over and make sure he's eating, cut up all his vegetables and put them in containers so he could easily cook. And this night I was just so exhausted from caring for him for months. And I just thought, I'm just going to stay at home tonight. But I actually lied to him and said I was going on a date, which I wasn't. And I just knew that he would, if I said I was going on a date, he would be happy because he wanted me to find love. So I just said that. Whereas he would have tried to pull, rubber arm me if I said, oh, no, I want to stay at home. So I stayed at home. I went to bed at 8:00. I was exhausted. He texted around that same time that I went to bed and ended up taking his life just after 12, and he wasn't found until the next day around lunchtime. So I definitely have a lot of guilt and regret for not responding back to that text message, but I didn't know that it was going to be the last time I would ever see him. So I guess my advice for other people who are going through something like that is you really can't take the blame. It's not your fault.
Yeah.
And there would have been nothing that you can do to have stopped them. And if you did by chance stop them this time, they would have planned to do it another time.
Yeah.
I often remind my mum, because she has a hard time understanding why she received that call from Jamie the night of his suicide, and how he was so excited and said how much he loved her and everything. And my mum didn't quite understand, like, why did he said this stuff, but then he's gone and taken his life. And I think when someone has accepted their fate and when someone has made that decision, they make peace with that. And that's why I think he came across as so okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting too, logically, it makes sense to think it's mental health, but, you know, the person that takes their own life knows what they're doing. They've logically thought about this in advance.
Mm-hmm.
And I think also too, we all go through problems. We all go through depression. We all go through struggle and overcoming adversity. And when you're in that bubble and it's just you and your thoughts, I think you don't really know the effect of what can happen to the families that have to grieve and go through the pain. And it's just so
he wasn't in his logical mind.
It's so heartbreaking.
At that point. So he wouldn't have, I doubt he would have been thinking of his family or his friends, because they are just so tunnel vision, so focused on ending the pain that nothing else matters.
Yeah. And what's really hard to see as well, and I can empathise to a degree, I can understand where someone's coming from that chooses to take their own life, is you're in that situation and you have this idea that people would just be better off without you, and it's just not true. It destroys families. It's heartbreaking. What was Jamie like as a person? Who was Jamie? Tell me about him.
He was, I think I'm biased, but he was the funniest person I've ever known in my life.
Yeah.
He's the type of person to give you the shirt off your back, give you the shirt off his back if you were in need, or even money. Even though he didn't have a whole lot, he would still give you his last dollar. Like, he was just the kindest, sweetest person, and he just wanted to be loved.
Yeah,
he just wanted to be loved, and so many people loved him. So many people loved him. He had such a incredible turnout for his funeral, and so many people over the world that he's worked with have, sent in their love and have written things to him and all of those things. So he made a massive impact on people's lives, and he didn't even know.
I know. That's what's so sad about it.
He didn't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
He didn't know. And it is sad.
Yeah. And you know what? It's, in hindsight of everything that's happened to Sam, is a tragedy can sort of spark a movement. And this is what you're doing with men's mental health, and you're an advocate for mental health. And as tragic and as heartbreaking as this is, you're doing some pretty remarkable things on socials and raising awareness. And, there's this movement happening that I think is fantastic in what you're doing. I just think it is such a heartbreaking event, but there is some good that came out of it. Do you agree?
I agree. So, I had two choices when Jamie died, when he took his life. I can either let it take my life too, because I contemplated I remember having intrusive thoughts, and after Jamie died, and I remember begging my mum and dad to let me go as well. I remember driving in the car and driving, you know, at 80 k's along the street and thinking, if I just drive into this pole, I'll be with Jamie and everything will be fine. Didn't even think of my son. So I had two choices, and the other choice was either turn this pain into something worthwhile and positive and impactful. And for a while I was choosing that the other side of the coin, of wallowing in my pity and being super sad. Yeah, I was doing that for quite some time, but then something just switched in me, and I have now been able to, you know, turn my pain into power in honor of Jamie. You know, I often say, having Jamie as my brother for 31 years was the greatest gift of my life, but equally losing him has been the greatest gift of my life.
Yeah. I interviewed Tim Thomas. So Tim Thomas is a friend of mine who's a martial artist who was also in the Special Forces in the Army. And my dad passed away in 2020. He unfortunately had a pneumonia, but he had a debilitating illness known as Parkinson's disease, and it was a really tough time. But Tim sent me a piece called The Last Gift, and Tim will be on the podcast next week. And we talked about this, and The Last Gift was a piece that he wrote, and it said the pain that a loved one leaves upon you is their last gift. And the analogy to it is that it's the idea of remembering to live and live a life worth fulfilling and being purposeful. And how do you want to be remembered? But more so, if that loved one was looking down on you, they wouldn't want you to just stop and just quit at life. They would want you to keep going and push through that adversity and overcome those struggles. And, you know, I think in hindsight of this tragedy that happened, you just never know the impact that you could be making in someone's life. And look at all the followers that follow you. Men in particular reach out for you all over the world. You know, you get DMs from people left, right, and center. That's families that have been struggling with their loved one through mental health. The impact that you're making. I mean, how does that make you feel?
I still pinch myself sometimes because I'm just like, you know, wow, I actually do have some kind of impact on people's lives, and it makes me feel great. But it also is just another way for me to be able to honor and like honor my brother, and keep his legacy and his memory alive. You know, I just, there wasn't any part of me that was ever going to not share this. There was always a part of me that wanted to speak his truth and my truth. And I feel like that's exactly what I'm doing, and I'm honoring him doing that. Yeah.
And it's remarkable, the impact and the positivity that, you know, I've seen online with what you're doing. It's how you and I connected. I stumbled across your Instagram page and I just looked through it, and, you know, I learned about your story and what had happened with you, and it really just sparked a huge, it hit home. You know, it really did for me. You know, I've had some dark days in my life too, but more importantly, I've lost friends to suicide. What do you hope, I guess, for listeners to take away on what we've just been discussing today?
Yeah, I just want people to realize that suicide is fucking real, and it's cruel and it's harsh, but it's reality. This happens. And so it's so important for us to stop being judgmental, stop being mean, stop being cruel, you know, be kind to people, because you just don't know what they're going through. You have no idea what someone is going through. And I guess the other thing that I just want to reiterate is that it's not weak to speak. It's not weak to be vulnerable. It's not weak to seek out help. There is so much help out there, and there are people that genuinely care about you and love you. And you know, you are needed on this earth, regardless of what your mind is saying. Your mind is going to find evidence to back up that you're not worth it. Your mind will play tricks on you, but you are worth it, and you are needed on this earth.
Yeah. No, well said, Sammy. Amazing chatting to you today. And where can people find you? So you're on all the socials?
Yeah, I'm mostly on Instagram, really. I don't really post a whole lot on Facebook, so you can definitely find me on Instagram. I'm sure you'll link me.
Yes. Yeah. No, it's been an awesome chat, Sam, and what a remarkable journey that you've been on, good and the bad. But a movement is happening right now, a much needed discussion, and more people need to sort of acknowledge the fact that our mental health is such a huge problem in today's world right now, especially with just this whole dating crisis that's happening. Children, struggling with their mental health, or even people that have come back from war, PTSD, and just the questions that people need to ask on if someone is struggling and what they should be doing and how they should address it, because there's no right or wrong way about it, but there are always better ways to go. And I think you really sort of nailed some good points here, which is awesome. So no, thank you so much, Sam.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
No worries. Awesome to chat to you, and we'll speak to you soon.
Yeah, chat soon.
Thank you, Sam.
No worries.